A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum Extra when we review the major events of the week. My name is Kenneth Anderson Lukwago, your host. Today, I have a panel of 4 people. The 3 are already here in studio. I'll be introducing them shortly, but first, the issues that we are going to be running through during these 2 hours. First, we'll be looking at the South Sudan crisis and the role of our country, Uganda. President Yoweri Museveni landed in Juba yesterday for what was described as bilateral talks, although people have insisted that one of the key issues there will be the conflict within that country. Well, we know Uganda's role in pacifying some countries within the region continues to grow, South Sudan being one of them. Uganda is a guarantor of the peace process, and we have already deployed our forces in Juba. And the opposition there within the SPLM, led by Dr. Riek Machar, want our forces to be removed from Juba, and there are reports that he's already under house arrest, although the government in South Sudan says those are lies. Now, the South Sudanese government says they are committed to implementing the peace deal. One of the key issues within that peace deal is holding elections. Uganda thinks that holding elections will help South Sudan to stabilize, because it's only then that a leader who is embraced by all people will emerge. Now, elections were supposed to be in December. It's not clear whether such a process will occur. So the question we're asking, how can we address this unending crisis in South Sudan, and does Uganda hold the key to such a settlement? We'll also be looking at the national budget and asking a question, is it a ritual or a serious business? Now, the Minister of Finance did present the estimates for the next financial year budget. Our budget will be 71.9 trillion shillings. The minister explained that the increase in the budget compared to previous years reflects government alignment with the priorities outlined in the National Development Plan 4. This plan is the bedrock of what government is planning to do to build the Ugandan economy tenfold. There are 10 priorities, which include maintaining peace, security, rule of law, human capital development, monetization of the economy through wealth creation programs, including PDM and EMIOGA. Others include stabilizing the agriculture, eliminating corruption, and environmental conservation. The government has also indicated that an additional 600 billion is being provided to cater for areas that have been affected by the USAID cut. The opposition also presented its alternative budget, showing that if they were in the power, the country would operate with a 55.7 trillion shillings national budget. According to them, this would be supported by fighting corruption, so the money can be used on service delivery. And the leader of opposition there, Joel Senyonyi, pointed a bleak picture of Uganda's economic landscape, highlighting the cost of living being so high, rampant corruption, and neglect of essential public services. He also said the 71.9 trillion national budget presented by government, where over 30% of the funds will be allocated to debt servicing, is almost an empty thing. He criticized government's persistent fiscal indiscipline, saying there's excessive borrowing, corruption, and he argued that all these have strained the economy. So we'll be asking, do you have a faith in this national budget? Has it become a ritual, as some people have suggested? To digest these issues, already in studio, like I already said, I have 3 people here. Let me introduce them. I'll begin with the Honorable Stephen Mkitale Birawa, who joins us. He is executive board member at the National Planning Authority in charge of infrastructure and physical planning. He's also a former Blissa County MP. He was chairperson of the Committee on National Economy in Parliament, a member of the Budget Advisory Committee. So he understands very well these issues to do with budgeting. Good evening, Honorable Mkitale. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good evening, Kenneth. Good evening, Spectrum Special listeners and viewers, and happy being here with my good friend, the panelist, Nicholas. It has been some time. I also took some leave from being here.
Indeed.
In the process of making the NDP 4. But we are here in, let me first wish the Kabaka the best of the birthday. I happen to have my birthday in the same week with the royal, and I enjoy it. And the other celebration I have with him is when he was going to have his coronation at Nagaleva. I was also coming from All Saints for wedding, so I'm always a relative. But we are in quite a very unpredictable times. Somebody was saying that possibly we are going to have a third world war. Trump came to announce a third world war, this time not necessarily using arms. It could be using the trade wars. And we are being reminded the old debate we had of the trade wars, of our tariffs, taxes, because who pays, things to do with why we ended up with the world, the agreements on tariffs and trade, the GATT, how we ended up with the UNCTAD, the pre-World War, the post-World War, during the Cold War issues, and you can see Europe is trying to do a rebuttal, a retaliation. You can see Canada is lying low. I hope by the end of this confusion, we are not announcing the end of the American empire and announcing China as the leader. We really need to take this very seriously. But
I think the most serious question will be, where would this leave Africa, which is always unprepared for such global...
And that's what I was ending with. So for us as Africa, as an emerging new frontier, we need to position ourselves very carefully so that we also talk about African continent trade, we also talk about regional trade, we also talk of what do we want in all this, because people are posturing.
All right.
Where do we want Africa to be?
All right. Our second panelist, Dr. James Tweheyo, member of the NRM Central Executive Committee representing workers, is also a newly elected member of the NRM Electoral Commission. Dr. James Tweheyo, congratulations on that appointment.
Thank you very much, my brother. Good evening to you, especially those who are with me here in the studio. Yes, I accept to take that responsibility because it is my duty to ensure that there is stability, that there is peace, that there is confidence within the public about the democracy that we all crave for. I add my voice to congratulate those who had successes, but I also add my voice once more to those who have lost their dear ones, those who have had challenges. And I look forward also to my Kabaka's birthday run. Those who don't know, by the way, I'm a Muko here. Yes. And therefore, when it comes to issues of the Kabaka, issues of the others, the Sabasaja, I'm there. And I would like to fraternize with them and look forward to the run. We are ready for that.
Let me introduce the third panelist, Mr. Nicholas Opio, human rights lawyer, pundit on governance and human rights issues. Good evening, Nicholas. It's a pleasure having you here in studio.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Good evening to the listeners and to the two distinguished panelists, all of whom belong to the NRM. Congratulate the good doctor for his new assignment. Just before the show, we were chatting about why he's always being shuttled here and there.
Shifted left, right, and center.
I told him he's a good worker. He's a very humble servant of his party.
He's a fixer.
He's not a whiner. He doesn't complain, so you should take it with a plump. It's also good to see Mr. Dialogue. I hope that the language of dialogue features prominently in the new NDP plan.
All right, gentlemen, as we wait for the fourth panelist, when he gets here, I will introduce him. Now, let's begin with this situation in South Sudan. And I want to come to you, Nicholas Opio, first. South Sudan became the youngest
54th
country in Africa, but also in the world. And there was a lot of hope that the South Sudanese people would work it out. They were comrades at arms. We saw the late Garang and Salva Kiir working hand in hand. Some people have said Dr. Riek Machar was not part of the mix because he was busy elsewhere, abroad, doing certain things. And we thought there would be sustainable peace with independence, since they were breaking away from Khartoum, which they thought was actually not doing things in their favor. But here we are. Every time and then we keep on hearing insecurity, and somehow we get involved as Uganda. What's your take about this situation, the unending conflict in South Sudan, and what do you think could be at the bottom of it?
No, South Sudan is a multi-layered, complicated conflict. whose roots, in my view, go back to the historical divide between the Arab North and the Black African South. Because that essentially was the reason for the SPLA war. It was also the reason for Uganda's involvement in that SPLA-SPLM war. Because we allied ourselves with what we saw as Black Africans as against the marauding and expanding Arab North. To understand this dynamic, you may want to take a look at a book written by Susan Rice, who was Obama's national security advisor. I think at some point had served in the Clinton administration. In that book, she describes, among other things, the reason the U.S. administration then described Isaiah Afwerki of Eritrea, Mele Zenawe of Ethiopia, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, and Paul Kagame of Rwanda as the new breed of African leaders. It really was not about, according to Rice, an endorsement of their quality of leadership. Rather, they were looking for bulwarks, fronts, to help hold back what they saw as the expansionist policies of the Arab North. But she also goes into some granular detail describing the closure of the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum and its relocation to Nairobi at the time, and the reason that informed that relocation. Really, it was that fear about the expansionist North under extremist leaders like al-Turabi and his later rival Omar al-Bashir. And so that set the backdrop for the 30-year war that led to then the liberation of South Sudan. But the liberation of South Sudan had to contend with two things. The SPLM historicals of the Garang era, whose claim was that they are the ones who fought really hard for this thing, and the new arrival who was working with Khartoum really in Riek Machar. Sorry, sorry, I forget his name, the vice president now. And so he was co-opted into the system, and with liberation came the mixture of a new Noir leader who had worked with the North, who had then converted to join the SPLM, contending with historicals who had sacrificed their life for a long time in the bushes fighting the Sudan army. And so you then have that convenience, alliance of convenience, that was not in any way helped by the sudden death of John Garang, and left them with that suspicion. And that suspicion has continued to hold that country at bay up until now. The amount of distrust, the amount of just a lack of good faith on both ends, with the Dinka and other tribes in the south viewing the Noor and their leader, Riek Machar, with suspicion. It's almost like what happens here in the NRM, where they say you join from City Square. And that mistrust has inhibited the growth of a new nation. The second thing, of course, is what I see as the overbearing influence of external actors in South Sudan. Remember that Uganda was a proxy state in the war in South Sudan, hosting the SPLA on behalf of the Americans, their backers. In fact, when I was a young child growing up in Gulu, John Garang would be seen having tea at North View Hotel in Impeche, in the area where I grew up. So we hosted, we armed, we supported the SPLA movement. And I think in many ways, Uganda has had an overbearing influence in South Sudan. An influence that has become divisive. First, at the beginning of the current version of the peace agreement, Uganda was kicked out of the room because it was seen as a partisan actor allying with one side over the other. Uganda has variously been accused, way back as 2014, of using cluster bombs in South Sudan. This evidence is documented by UN panel of experts. It's been documented by Human Rights Watch in a report in 2014. And so Uganda's involvement has been one that is deeply divisive yet necessary. Necessary in the sense, if you look at it from the Ugandan prism, that when that place goes up in arms, we are the ones who have to shoulder the burden of refugees, the burden of dealing with the humanitarian crisis in that place. But from the Sudanese side, South Sudan side, especially from the NOAA group, that ally themselves with Riek Machar, Dr. Riek Machar, they view Uganda's involvement as partisan, as biased, as seeking to sustain what clearly is a government that doesn't have firm and full control of the country, or doesn't enjoy the majority support in South Sudan, or at least vast majority of the country think that he's way past his due date. And so a complexity of these issues, the overbearing but necessary influence of Uganda, the ethnic composition of the government with a suspicion from Dr. Riek Machar, the newer group who came from the north, has just combined to have a very combustible effect, and that has in many ways inhibited the development of a democratic state. The last one is this. And then you have to look at the recent visit by Raila Odinga to South Sudan, where the president of South Sudan sent him to where the master is, and simply blocked him from his mission and says, if you want to come, go and speak to Museveni. South Sudan is literally run from the coffers of Uganda. Uganda is picking up the bills for peacekeeping there from Ugandan taxpayers.
That's so.
They just approved in Parliament 39 billion for that deployment. But what is also really important to note is that the financial stability of South Sudan really is in the hands of the Ugandan economists. You just have to look at the data and what is happening there. Their treasury is run out of Kampala. And so there's a deep, sinister economic interest that is then masked as national interest in our involvement in South Sudan. Essentially, we are, in many ways, a disrupting force, but also a peacekeeping force. It's difficult to see Uganda's role in Sudan, but also it's difficult to dismiss it. So that's where we find ourselves, and that's the problem that South Sudan finds itself in.
All right. And the question is, can Uganda, through these kind of interventions, bring about lasting peace? Or what do you think would be the best formula? Because there was a proposal for elections so that a leader who enjoys the full mandate is identified. But the Dr. Riek Machar side seems to accuse President Salva Kiir that they are not doing anything into that direction, into holding an election. What do you think would be the best approach?
So Uganda cannot be the solution to South Sudanese problems. My view, my own personal view, is that South Sudan needs a reset. The protagonist in that conflict must be removed from the equation for meaningful new dynamics to be infused in that country. For as long as you have Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, you are going to have this tension, because they all control large swaths of the army. So you've got to begin to think about a reset, and that reset would include this IGAD-led process has failed. This IGAD-led process by the former president of Mozambique, Chisano, has really failed. I've got a childhood friend who has worked on that peace process as a legal advisor for the last 12 years. That has become his full-time job. And the frustrations from that process are very clear if you speak to the experts involved. 2 Ugandans have been involved in that process who are very dear to me, Mr. Bani Afako, based out of London, and Mr. Stephen Ola, the former legal advisor for the refugee law project of Makerere Law School. And all of them expressed that IGAD process really, that had so much hope, has failed. Now, the IGAD process having failed, Uganda's role being divisive and incapable of solving the problem, 2 things, in my view, become really important as a solution. First, we must disarm that country. The proliferation of firearms in the hands of different militia groups just helps to foment conflict. So first, just disarm that country, have a demilitarized state with an international peacekeeping force that is then deployed to be able to, perhaps under the auspices of the UN Security Council, to be able to hold the peace in that country. It is almost the same as what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina post the genocide there. Re-establish an effective government, re-establish an effective security system by demilitarizing, disarming all the little small chieftaincies and groups and to avoid the possibility of conflict. The second thing then is that we must engage in a deliberate process of reconstruction. That country is in a complete mess. If you go out to Juba and see, in spite of the millions of dollars that's been spent on that government, the lives of the people have never changed. Many South Sudanese generals live large lives in Kampala, Nairobi, and interestingly, when I was on the boat just below the Sydney Harbour Bridge, they showed me a palatial estate belonging to a South Sudanese general right next to the home of the Australian Prime Minister. And so they are siphoning these resources out of the country and leaving the country in complete despair. I think that there has to be internationally mobilized reconstruction process to begin to infuse some sort of social benefits and development of an economy. Right now, it's really an economy of bad actors. Right. And of course, that has got to be financed in largely, I think, for example, from the oil revenue, because a lot of money from that oil revenue that is not being seen in the livelihoods of the people of South Sudan.
All right, Spectrum Mix on Radio 1 FM 90, that's the voice of Mr. Nicholas Opio, giving us a context of the South Sudanese conflict. Let's go for a break now. When we return, the Honorable Stephen Mutalibirawa and Dr. James Tweheyo will weigh in, but also we do value your feedback, so do share with us via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090. Spectrum Extra continues after this break. Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. My guests are here in studio, Mr. Nicholas Opio, human rights lawyer, pundit on governance and human rights issues, Dr. James Tweheyo, member of the Central Executive Committee of the NRM. He's also a member of the Electoral Commission of that political party, and the Honorable Stephen Mutalibirawa, an executive board member at the National Planning Authority. He did also represent the people of Blissa County in Parliament. Dr. James Tweheyo, the South Sudanese situation and our big role as a guarantor, but also with an intervention force.
You know, the South Sudan situation should not only be seen of what it is today. We should have a clear background of what it is. My brother Nicholas tried to explain. For the last 25 years, Sudan has been in a crisis. There's been a lot of displacements, both internal and external. In fact, most of the South Sudanese who have been displaced are either living in Uganda, in Kenya, or in Ethiopia. There's been a lot of forced displacement inside, internal. Like we used to have challenges in northern Uganda. A lot of displacement. There have been a lot of ethnic massacres, real killings of journalists, coalition, all those, food shortages, drought. And as I speak now, about 6.9 million South Sudanese are at the brink of dying of hunger. A number of areas in South Sudan are not accessible because roads have been washed away, the economy is doing so badly, and all those are a result of the conflict, which partly is generated by the leaders, but which more is manifested in the tribal conflicts and ethnicity that is there underlying in South Sudan. If you can remember, in 2018, there was that that agreement that was made between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, and we thought they would move on. But even when it was done, I think it was superficial in a way that they never settled to do the work of leading the country together as was expected. So subsequently, a number of things continued deteriorating, including the deterioration of the physical infrastructure, the deterioration of the peace, all that fighting that has been within, it has not been escalated to a certain level that is seen, but internally, South Sudan has been at war. Now, why then does Uganda come in? South Sudan is our clear neighbor on the north. South Sudan is one of the countries where we host. I think at the moment we have the highest. Congo used to be the biggest exporter of people in terms of refugees, but South Sudan is now overtaking it. Should we keep quiet and let this situation remain? I say a firm no. Now, under the international law, countries or even international organizations are permitted to go to other countries, but of course under the law and within the framework of the international law, under the UN Charter, Peacekeeping Charter, to either prevent war, to protect human rights, or to ensure that at least peace is enforced. You can go there for peacemaking, for peace enforcement, for peace building, but you must go there with the consent of the parties. You must go there and be seen to be impartial. And there should be none use of force except in self-defense. Those are some of the issues that I've been looking at, and some people sometimes present issues as if Uganda is in Congo, rather in Sudan for war. No. Uganda is there particularly to prevent the deaths, to support the peacekeeping, but also to ensure that peace is prevailed and to make sure that these people in Sudan, they simply don't die because they can't settle in their homes, because they must be displaced, because they have no food. And therefore, we need to look at that with the humanity and humane that is required to support the neighboring countries. If you have taken note, actually 2.3 million people are refugees in the nearby countries, meaning that Sudan, South Sudan, is actually one of the three major countries where people have fled. The other one is Afghanistan, Syria, and Venezuela. If you compare this with a smaller country like Sudan, should we keep quiet and fold our arms and let this situation continue? The answer is no. If our principle is patriotism, if our principle is to make sure that we all live together in harmony, we should make sure that we do that. But also away from that, Uganda as a country, we depend on our neighbors. How? South Sudan is one of the countries where we earn from. That's the reality come up. We export food, South Sudan, we export maize, we export even up to the level of tomatoes. So if there is no peace in South Sudan, we stand to lose even much more than the South Sudanese. Once you look at the volume of money that comes from South Sudan, and you have your granary kept there, and you say, let my granary be burnt, who is the loser? So genuinely, we are there to protect, first of all, the people of Sudan, but also to protect our own interests as a country, because in all other ways, it is part of our lifeline, and we must make sure we protect our lifeline, because once you have a well where you fetch water, and you allow it to grow bushy, and you allow it to dry, who is the loser? So some people complain, Uganda sends in money, is spending money to do all that. Yes, but this is partly the money which we earn there, and we should look at the bigger picture. Money, is it more important than the people? Is it more important than the lives of these South Sudanese? Is it more important than the peace we need to have? By the way, if this peace that we have here was in any case interfered with the overflow of South Sudan, who would be the loser? By the way, Uganda, if you look at our country, we are like a grass-thatched house. We are landlocked. So if we want to protect ourselves from inside, it is very easy to burn a grass-thatched house than protecting it from outside. And I think it is safer for us to go and support South Sudan government, to build peace, to save the people of South Sudan, to save the massacre that is going there, to ensure that there is food supply in South Sudan, to ensure that there is also that stability that we require. And I think if His Excellency the President, as he has been there anyway, and I want to welcome him back because he's back in the country and peacefully and happily too.
Yeah, I've seen. He
If he
just
could-
arrived a few minutes
Yes,
ago.
if he
at
could
Entebbe.
support
Mm.
the two warring parties and their leaders, that is Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, and those who are behind them, to get back the drawing board of the 2018 peace agreement which they made, I think when Sudan is at peace, we are more at peace than Sudan itself.
Will the interests at play allow Sudan to become peace? Because we are told there are so many interests around that country.
Certainly,
Like Nicolas Opio said, SPLA was being supported by the Americans, and there are other global interests, China and everybody, probably looking at the
every
oil.
other country has players,
Mm.
including our own country. We have been surviving on the USAID aid. Isn't that America? Haven't they
is.
been supporting us?
It is.
So, certainly, when there is war, by the way, always the beginning of peace quite often is war. And the end of war quite often is peace. What the South Sudanese people have gone through should be enough to bring them down the drawing board to say, we have had enough. Our people have suffered enough. Can't we sit down and draw a peace plan and see how we move together and forward as a country? But sometimes it needs a third party to bring warring parties together.
All right.
And Uganda comes in handy as having been a friendly force, a friendly country to this country, South Sudan.
All right. Like I've already indicated, and Dr. James Tweheo did confirm that President Yoweri Museveni is already back in the country. And I'm reading from his X handle. He says, before departing Juba today, I met with a delegation from the African Union's panel of the WISE, led by former Burundian President, His Excellency Dalmatia Ndazieye. We discussed the current security situation in South Sudan and the African Union's role in ensuring the peaceful implementation of the peace agreement. Prior to this meeting, I interacted with the leaders of various political parties in South Sudan. I would like to thank His Excellency President Salva Kiir for his warm hospitality. So, Honorable Mkitale, we have a panel of the WISE in South Sudan already, and President Yoweri Museveni is envisaging that the African Union has a bigger role to play in the implementation of the peace agreement. Do you see this happening? The concerted efforts that are being undertaken, can we say that peace is likely to return to South Sudan, lasting peace?
Kwame Nkrumah usajje for 63, 64 years ago said Africa must unite. And I can actually see him being immortalized, him and his contemporaries, who thought that was very important for the Balkanized colonial Africa to do everything possible so that we don't just look at these boundaries. And welcome back His Excellency the President from that noble cause. But as we are discussing South Sudan, about 20 years ago it was agreed the young baby, the latest new kid on the block, be born from northern Sudan. But the north is at war. The Gallo, the former boss of the Janjaweed, and those who took over from Bashir, they are at war. The war is actually in Khartoum itself, in the city, that even the little oil revenue which South Sudan should be sending to the sea sometimes is not flowing because of that conflict. And I've always said that we should look at our oil going to Tanga not only to be from Uganda, the earliest we bring in the DRC, because the DRC will never take their oil to Atlantic, it has to come naturally to the Albertine, the neighbors God gave them, and also South Sudan. Why am I bringing this? My colleagues have already painted the picture, and Nicholas really graphically illustrated this complex situation that during the Cold War, there was a fight, what is called the blue line and the red line, that where should Sudan and Uganda belong. Some of the problems we had in Uganda, by the way, could not even be Obote's problem. You know, we try to reduce our problems so much to ourselves. Now we are discussing the tribes in South Sudan. We are discussing, the problem is, we are now dealing with the tertiary. In Sudan, we are dealing with the tertiary effects. The primary effects that the fight between the Afro vis-a-vis the Arabs, which at that time was taken advantage of by the pro-West and the pro-East. And as he said, the days of the Torabis and the Bashirs. So Sudan suffered that conflict. Now we have the Chinese investing in these countries. By the way, even in DRC, it is the same. America is trying to see how do they tame the Chinese in DRC. But for us, we are now discussing Wanyamulenge, peripheral issues. The bigger issues are there, and people are making money in these areas. The arms deals are real. Before this man in Russia was killed, this mercenary, what was it? What was his name? I was worried.
The Wagner boss.
The Wagner boss. Because the arms deals, the arms proliferation, as we used to call it, you know, and the should be condemned. And that's why in my preamble I started by saying, I wish there was a global village. I wish we are going back to multilateral, because my worry, Trump is taking us away from multilateralism. He doesn't want to go to climate change. Now he says NATO can, he's secondary. Now when we go back, you know, to protectionism, to unilateralism, then where does, because what we are dealing with first of all now in Sudan is the humanitarian crisis. How do you deal with it in absence of UNHCR? Because if Trump tomorrow says, I'm no more contribution to the UN, then we are in problems. So really, for those of us who think, even with all the weaknesses of the UN system and multilateralism, we need multilateralism. It is dangerous to say that the powerful are mighty, and we forget that. So first of all, how do we deal with this humanitarian crisis in both the Sudans, by the way, the north and south? Because what I have seen already in Uganda, before we used to have South Sudanese as refugees in Uganda, but now there are so many
from upper north.
From upper north here in Uganda, and I'm sure they are also in the other neighbors of Ethiopia and the other neighbors elsewhere. Yes, and indeed, my colleagues have already put it. We are, the whole of our northern border is Sudan. So naturally, you cannot wait for the fire to come into your sitting room. Naturally, we have to get interested there, you know. And you remember in Karamoja when they were telling us that getting bullets and guns was like buying maize from a market. It's because when those arms become too many in that neighborhood, anybody can acquire them. And therefore, that problem, you may think it is Sudanese problem, but actually it is already in your compound. So we have a very big problem how to deal with this challenge. And when I thought actually he was going to quote Mamdani's book, The Good Muslim.
Good Muslim, Bad Muslim.
But he quoted Susan Rice's book. You know, it is wrong for us even to get into that confusion. Fundamentalism is bad. Extremism, fanaticism is bad. Whether it is Muslim, whether it is Christian. Whether it is capitalism, whether it is socialism. That's why some of us are for, for the social capitalism.
Whether it's NRM or whether it's Snoop.
Whether it's NRM or it's Snoop. I said it the other day in Kawempe election. Fundamentalism is bad. Extremism is bad. Terrorism is bad. Now, at some point, I even, what we are calling the protagonist, I think they have almost lost it. Biological, how many years are you giving Salva Kiir if you think he's a solution? He cannot. We must be intentional to demilitarize this region. And the arms in this region are no longer just the arms of that region. I
was reading from a social media post put up by you, one of the prominent journalists in South Sudan, who is actually talking about the desire by Salva Kiir to have his son-in-law replace him as president. Issues of transition in South Sudan could also be playing out.
You know, I was... In fact, most of the guns that were terrorizing Karamoja were coming from South Sudan. And that shows you, and when I was working with the Karamojong people, they would tell you that you can buy a gun at a cost of 2 sacks
That's what I'm
of
saying,
of
like
rice,
maize.
of sorghum, an AK-47, and the sack of sorghum was costing about maybe 200, so 400,000. You could buy a gun with 30 magazines, with 30 rounds of ammunition, which is terrible. Which means there are so many ravaged guns which are thrown around in South Sudan, and that makes the place very dangerous.
So my plea to the Pan-Africanists is desist from this superficial, diagnosis and thinking it is some Dinka and some, no, this is a tertiary problem. Up there, the primary causes we know. South Sudan is arable. It can feed neighbors if there was peace. Because up in Cairo, at the Delta, they have some level of self-sufficiency just using what they call wastewater from Uganda. So I really would want, and how I wish that the IGAD had worked, and how I wish the statement the president is making of he's called them what? He has called them what?
The African wise.
The African wise. I wish it was real, that the African wise were real, and they have the resources, and that they can deploy tomorrow and say, yes, now here we are bringing a Pan-African force, we are bringing some semblance, because as I was telling you, where Trump is taking us, what we have seen after this Russia and their neighbors' war, the fights now, the repositioning of the new giants in the world, we should also, in Africa, be repositioning ourselves. First of all, start with the West African region trade. But how do you do it amid this confusion? We should be, now from there, we say, okay, if we're having very good trade in DRC and Sudan, then the next thing, we can go to the neighbors. How do we connect to the other regions, the North African, the West African, the South African, the SADC? Now, the African continent free trade is not, debate then becomes, impossible. So we must deal with the humanitarian crisis. We must demilitarize this region and make sure that we bring in neutral forces. Africa must be intentional, and we are not lacking the money. And I don't think we're going to wait for money from NATO, money from America, money from, because they themselves now, everybody has been put at inward looking.
All right.
Because Europe now is saying, what do we? They have just suffered challenges of being switched from the Russian energy.
Gas.
Their cost of living energy cost has gone almost 80%. Now, as they are still dealing with those problems, the trade wars of Trump have been announced, and they are talking of retaliation. So the African issue will become very peripheral on their agenda.
All right.
Because the new world order, or the new international economic order, as we used to call it, international relations, is now informing them to also look, first of all, inward. So we must, Africa now, prove ourselves that we are still leaders, we can be leaders, the wise men can be there, and that we can be practical to bring some order. Otherwise, by the time the new turbulence, the unpredictable new world order is taking us, Africa may actually even be more vulnerable. The China, the Americans will, you saw how America is pushing Ukraine for a deal, insulting a leader of a country like a baby, because he wanted to squeeze him for that mineral deal. So what will he do when he comes to Sudan and DRC and some of our neighbors if we don't stand to take the Kwame Nkrumah and contemporaries' dream? The aspiration of Africa must unite.
All right. The son-in-law of General Salva Kiir, my dad, that is reportedly interested in actually taking over the reins, is known as Dr. Benjamin Bolmel. Apparently, he's already a vice president, so it will just be a matter of switching where he sits to the bigger position. Nicholas Opio, President Yoweri Museveni seems to be having faith in the African AU solution. Do you think the AU can step up and foster peace across the continent, address some of these conflicts?
Absolutely not. Regional blocks have proven a little more cohesive, especially in the ECOWAS region. The African Union is incapable of any legitimate leadership on the continent. Think about it this way. Without the contribution of the global West, the African Union would really be on its knees. Would really be on its knees. And you cannot ask that union to be the one to spearhead the peace initiative in South Sudan. South Sudan is a global problem now. I think that it requires a global solution because the job of demilitarizing that country, disarming that country, is immense. It also involves the military equipment supply chain, the military economy. And that is a problem of a global significance. The problem of reconstructing that country. If the world is intent on reconstructing that country, it can do so in a year. We've done this before in other parts of the world where there have been such conflicts for a long time. Secondly, South Sudan presents for you a second layer of problems, which is the possibility of infiltration by the Islamic fundamentalist groups that is now making its way from Chad into parts of CAR, into DRC and northern Mozambique and parts of southern Tanzania. And so if you do not address that problem, it becomes an easy inroad from the from the Indian Ocean Islamic fundamentalist group that have wreaked havoc in Somalia for a long time. And so it becomes a very important place to ensure stability and ensure peace. And if you don't do that, it's a global problem that, in my view, is a problem above the weight of the African Union.
All right. Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. We've just been talking about the South Sudan conflict, and we'll be waiting to see how that issue is attended to. President Yoweri Museveni confirming that he did hold a meeting with a panel of African wise men who are in South Sudan to try and bring the two sides to a table. Uganda believes that an election process would bring about lasting peace.
President Museveni is very humorous. The Burundian president cannot be described as a panel of the wise.
Why wouldn't that be?
I have my own doubts about his capability of being...
He's just a chairperson. Maybe the other people who are on the panel.
Well, the chairperson speaks
wise.
of the group.
He didn't talk of the powerful, he talked of the wise.
So we'll be waiting to see how this process ends. But also, most important, how long it will take for the UPDF to return from South Sudan, because there are people who are asking questions about what mandates they are executing there and how long it will take for them to actually return back home. We're going to go for a break, and then after that we'll shift our gears and look at our other topic of discussion, which is the national budget. Before we do that, I'll read out comments that have come out as a result of this discussion we have had on South Sudan. The panelists will respond, and then we shift our gears to that other subtopic. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. Let's take that break now. Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Xtra, live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. Well, the listeners have contributed to this discussion and they have sent in their comments. So we have a comment coming in from Lake Samuel, who writes and says, since peace talks and mediation have failed, the next step is to implement a coordinated regional and international intervention that includes targeted sanction on spoilers, protection of civilians through peacekeeping or humanitarian corridors, and strong support for grassroots-led reconciliation and transitional justice process. Then we have another comment. Dear Mr. Pio, African leadership is the reason why most African countries are infected with wars. Can we learn how to serve and respect term limits? Why would African countries continue to support Russia by purchasing their guns and ammunition in exchange of limited resources? Let South Sudan develop a heart of patriotism. Minus patriotism, wars in Sudan, South Sudan, and Congo shall never end. That's Agre Musinguzi. Agre Musinguzi from Rwanda West constituency there with that comment. Somebody writes and says, Anderson, the analysis in the studio about South Sudan is enlightening, not only about South Sudan, but Sudan in general. Israel, after signing a Camp David Accord with the Arabs, they needed to keep Arabs busy with another war. So German machinery based at International Conference Center in Kampala instigated a war between Arab North and the Black South. This is a continuation of conflicts you understand from looking at the entire Arab world. That's a comment from Pat. Okelo Patrick Bonyo from Busega. South Sudan is suffering from the syndrome, if we fought or I fought, so I must reward myself or ourselves first. And as long as those generals and cronies are still around power center, there will be chaos for as long as they exist. Foreign interest comes in when the owners of the country are fighting. The current president, Salva Kiir, cannot resolve the situation at hand. Even Riek Machar cannot, because major ethnic tribes are involved and each will fight to protect their godfather. Spectrum Xtra, I first congratulate Council Nicholas of Pio for having succeeded in securing the freedom for his land friend and his fellow human rights lawyer, Aaron Kiza, who spent a long time in illegal incarceration. Thanks for the wonderful job, and glory to God that justice is beginning to prevail. On South Sudan, I am convinced that Mr. Museveni is not a neutral guarantor. That situation needs South Sudan to move to the next desired step. Africa Union, IGAD, should assign imperial and peace mediators. Those are the comments that we have received on this particular subtopic. Impartial, I think it's impartial mediator. Yeah, I think he had a typo, and he ended up writing imperial and peace mediators. Any comments on this response that we have gotten from the listeners before we can shift? Yes, Honorable Mkitali.
I just wanted to, first of all, agree. Largely the callers, I want to thank them. They really have a feel.
I don't know if we should call them WhatsAppers.
A deeper
listeners.
They have a deeper comprehension of this challenge. And really, it's no longer a Sudan problem. It is an African problem. It is a global problem. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a humanitarian disaster. And therefore, all those who mean well should be interested. And we need to take a multi-pronged approach. As we deal with the humanitarian disaster, we must demilitarize. We must also see how to create an internal truce and reconciliation, because some semblance of government has to come in at that stage, post the conflict resolution. You need to do the reconstruction plan of the whole region, because short of that, you cannot continue having the. As I said, at one time we thought the problem was the northern Sudan, of the extremist tribes and the Bashir. But even 20 years of ourselves, what we now calling them ourselves, because I hope I'm not talking to be a Christian fundamentalist and a black fanatic, because you can equally be caught up in that divide. So it's important that that is done, because if we don't, time is not on our side. Now, even as we switch to the next subject, I would like to quote one of the masterpieces in peace prevention and conflict resolution of Morgenthau, The Swords into Plowshare. That the very resources, that is the politics among nations, that the very resources would be talking to develop Africa, to go scientific, to industrialize. We are going to discuss the budget. Are the very resources we are spending in these conflicts, killing ourselves, buying the arms from the powerful? Of course, Russia is selling, because most of these arms are coming from those countries, even in China. By the way, much as AK was originally from Russia, yes, the one producing most of them is China. So we're actually shipping them from China, and that's unfortunate. You know, when we were talking last week about the switching from Umeme, I said there will always be coffin makers. You are in a crisis, you think everybody is mourning, but people are making money. For some people, it's arms deals, and that callousness is very unfortunate. And indeed, the arms deals are going on. There are those who are looking at this as an opportunity to make money, but it must end. So let us know this problem is in our compound. It's not just a Sudan problem. And indeed, a lot of Ugandans have been caught in that crossfire. We have people there who are doing good business, and not only Uganda. Kenya has markets there. They made roads before us. We're also trying to help them in some of this infrastructure, because we must trade as Africa. And if you check in the last 10 years, there has been increased regional trade. Uganda is no longer just sending the what you used to know as eggs and pineapples, and we are sending some manufactured goods, some at least some industrial products, goods which are going from some industries. So that means tomorrow, even by osmosis, by assimilation, the neighbors can equally also start bringing the same factory. Because if your technology is in Uganda, tomorrow it will be in South Sudan, tomorrow it will be in DRC. So it's unfortunate that when we thought that we are about to start seeing our brothers who have suffered not only 20 years of under the South Sudan, they suffered even in the other years of when they were under the Northern Sudan. So for them, they have not seen independence in real terms. So we are talking of over 55 years of conflict, and indeed that is too much. We should make sure that our brothers begin to enjoy life. For us, the years we had in war, it was too much. The 23 years of Northern Uganda was too much. The wars we had in Luero here only 5 years, you felt it. So how you just think about your brothers for almost 50 years.
All right, and I want you to take us through the budget process. The government did present in Parliament a budget, 71.9 trillion shillings for next financial year. 30% of this budget is going to be allocated towards debt servicing. We have 10 priorities, including peace, security, rule of law, human capital development, monetization of the economy through wealth creation programs like PDM and Myoga. We have supporting infrastructure development, stabilizing agriculture, eliminating corruption, environmental conservation, among others. And the government has responded to the cuts from USAID and providing 600 billion shillings to cater for the affected areas. The opposition says if they were in charge, the national budget will be 55.7 trillion shillings because they think that that's what Ugandans can afford to contribute, and because they collect through taxes. And according to them, they will focus on fighting corruption and save more money that will be used to develop the country. Your quick take on this budget process. Are you hopeful with this budget? And we actually told it's a major player as you implement the National Development Plan number 4, where you want to grow the economy tenfold.
The current running budget 2020 24-25 is the end of the National Development Plan 3. So the budget being discussed right now in Parliament is the year one plan, because the budget is also a plan, year one plan of the NDP 4, which we've just completed. And in this, it comes at the time when we are remaining with 2 more plans to deliver or to actualize the Vision 2040. So in other words, as we roll out this budget, this NDP 4, we are also mindful of what we may have not achieved in the previous 3 plans. So we are saying to do that, we need a 10 growth strategy to grow the economy from the current 55 billion US dollars to at least 500 plus. And that within this NDP4 alone, we should be able to double the growth to at least 100 to 110. So this is it's a task we set before ourselves, and it's important. And it is true, in the last 15 years or so of heavy investment in energy, infrastructure, heavy investment in roads, the country has a big toll in terms of debt servicing. Quite a amount of the resource. So I'm talking about the resource envelope really being constrained by debt servicing. But debt servicing, we know where this money has gone. So it becomes very important that we try as much as possible to be deliberate and intentional to increase domestic resource mobilization. How do we make sure that we are able to get more resources as a country? And that's why even when we see in the plan we are talking of the priorities like agro-processing, if you are getting more money now in coffee, if you are getting more money from fish export in raw form, you would actually get in the coffee you would get 10 more 10 more times value by just roasting the coffee if you don't export the bean. So it's possible to really to get this tenfold. Tourism, we are really having tourism, just nature. We haven't gone into high-end tourism. If we had the chain hotels, that's why I had a quarrel with these service providers in oil and gas in Bunyoro and Acholi who chose to use camps, 15,000 beds instead of giving us high-end chain hotels. To could accommodate these people because you are around the very beautiful Maxwell Falls. The Nile here, you are Pakuba here, in Bulisa, you are here in Budongo, but they sought to make quick change for themselves and they didn't look at what would enable the economy leapfrog. So we are talking about investing heavily in manufacturing and industrialization. We have given a priority to ICT, science and technology, and we think what we are calling ATMIS. These are very important areas where we think these are low-hanging fruits. These are cash cows. If money, the little money remaining is channeled in those areas, would make. I want to agree both by government side and possibly what seems to be amplified by the opposition. We can actually have efficiency gains. We can have allocative efficiency if we looked at where the wastage is. The word being used generally is corruption, but sometimes we don't want to define corruption. Government is currently rolling out the rationalization. How I wish it was across the board. The rationalization has started with a few agencies. The mergers, restructuring, and if it was done the way it should have been, a private sector-led economy should not have an obese public service because you are outsourcing. UNRWA doesn't make roads; they have been outsourcing for the years they have existed. So that's where the problem has been. So you can find institutional corruption by dealing with reducing duplication, the parallel institution. You can fight corruption by just reviewing the procurement. More than 40% of our corruption is procurement related. So if you centralize the high value procurement and get bulk purchases and you put all common, you could save well over 40% of our money.
All right.
The current expenditure of the current kind of mode of transport, even by government officials, is also wasteful. If we chose to say we go rapid transport, all of us when we go abroad, we buy cards and you sit in a metro and sit in a public transport and you move.
That's abroad.
So, but we can do it here. We can do it here.
We are so Ugandan.
What do we benchmark when we go out there? Then there are areas where we think that we are failing. The districts have not delivered. The decentralization has been actually reversed in terms of financial, administrative, and legal. And we may have to resort back to our regional governments. Because the regional government, you find, for example, regional referral hospital. If you did a regional UNRWA, is good. And you also have, even these universities, I have a complaint. One area which I am proposing should be rationalized is universities. If we're taking the old approach where you use NTCs and UCCs, this Makerere University was founded by all regions of Uganda 15. So it was just a matter of having
campuses,
the same standard of a university and the same courses at every region, and with virtual ICT coming in and artificial intelligence, the same lecturer in Makerere can be lecture, and then you have tutorial assistants on the other side. It is very possible, but somebody wants another. We are now beginning another.
We just launched one in
University.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And others are also clamoring for another.
Well, you've been fighting for Bunyoro
No, for
University.
me, I would rather we rationalize. I am only blaming them for delaying Bunyoro to have got theirs at the very beginning. Because at the time we were doing NTCs and UCCs in the 80s, that was the time to look at the regional. Because
Bunyoro had the Kamurasi.
It's a matter of regional balance. These cities should be looked at as growth centers, as economic zones, with their industrial parks and the skilling of their value chain. If you say, take for example, the other day we were discussing operational creation. If you say in Acholi, you want to do mass vegetable oil, you want to do some both animal fattening and dairy, you want to do sugar, then you make sure those value chains you want to do in that area are given all the advisory, the extension, the technology they require, so that every region becomes productive. So it is really possible the the areas which are being emphasized, the peace and the security, the rule of law, the human capital development, the financial deepening of the PDM. The only problem with PDM, we have pushed too much the pillar 3 of money. We need to look at the other pillars.
All
so
right.
all these areas are very important. I think what is important is to realize that we may not have all the money. How do we put money where it is?
All
Not
right.
everything should be a priority, and I think that's the intention of rationalization.
We'll be coming back to you, but let's hear from Dr. James Toheyo. Budget.
The budget of 71.9 trillion is close to the range of what we had last year of almost 72. But the biggest challenge that we have is not the budget per se. It is the debt burden and how we prioritize and the use of the little that is reserved from the collections from the country. Fortunately, I should say fortunately, because much of the aid that we used to depend on is no longer available. Why do I say it is fortunate? It gives us the opportunity to examine ourselves and see what we have been doing wrong and what have been doing right.
We might end up with a book from aid to debt.
Incidentally, incidentally, much of the money that has been coming through aid has not necessarily been coming to the country to service the people of the country. Much of it was going even through NGOs, and much of it was even repatriated. You find an NGO with a big expert who is earning from the country, from the money that comes, and the little that has been trickling the population has been so little, but we are paying anyway. So that's the first challenge. Now, our debt burden at the moment, which has grown incidentally, from initially about the external debt was 14.24, it has now grown. That was the external debt. The domestic debt, which was about $9.43, it's now going to 10.96. So why then is this debt growing? That's one of the things we should examine. First of all, we have been borrowing money and quite often not using it. I'll give you an example. The money that we borrowed to work on the road, on the expansion of the road from Jinja to Kampala, was borrowed in 2016. Up to today, the work is not done. And we've been servicing that loan. The money that we borrowed, some of it, to work on the electric lines, some of them are redundant. Why then should we borrow money and keep it there redundant and keep servicing it? That's one of the greatest disservice that we're having, and I think Parliament should set its foot down and look at what we are doing wrong. Because much of these big borrowings are coming through the endorsement of Parliament. Some of them are caused by, of course, our own issues of mismanagement. We should admit that there are some areas of mismanagement, but also in many cases we are making errors by putting our attention to where money should come from, but not where money should go and in what time. So when you consider the money that we borrow and the money that we borrow and don't use and continue servicing, it becomes a very big problem. And subsequently, it keeps on shooting up our budget to meet the demands of the borrowed money. I'm comfortable that much of this money is put the attention of these other areas of production. The only challenge I can see is that we are going to increase production, but we have not done very well on the other area of marketing. And that also tallies again with the other area of Sudan. For example, Sudan has been taking most of our eggs. We are telling our people in the villages, you can rear a hen or 2 or 10 and produce eggs. Where are these eggs going to go? We shall have a challenge of the stock, the dead stock. We are giving our people money to borrow money. Of course, PDM is borrowed money, by the way, if you didn't know, although it is almost at no or very little interest rate. Borrow money to go and grow maize. Maize is supposed to go to Sudan and Kenya. The next day it doesn't go. What happens? So we are likely to face a challenge, particularly when it comes to our areas of production where we're putting money, and we need to put additional attention to the marketing and value adding chain. If we don't do that, then our budget will have issues. Yes, those who are saying they can make a 55.7 trillion shillings budget, I wish them well. If only we were to work on the money that we need, particularly for servicing, but they will need less than that. We'll need even about 20 trillion. But much of the money comes because of the borrowing. Much of the money comes because we want to work on the drivers and incentives that help growth. If you are to work on a road, the money you need for the road, even if it's for a short time, is quite a lot. Korosa. When you go to the communities and you hear what they're asking, they'll tell you want electricity. All MPs are up in arms saying, you know, my area doesn't have electricity. My area needs a road. Where does this money come from? Yes, we can do it at the same time, but we must get them done. To produce and to generate more funds, we need funds to invest in it. And the earlier we get this done, the better. The question is, shall we reach a time and reduce our budget? Shall we reach a time and meet our deficit? For the first time, I think now we have hit the jackpot of our oil, and soon it will be coming up. If we have been investing, for example, in the Kabarega National, the airport, perhaps the money we invested in shall have a return for the first time from the oil that will be generated from there. So let's be positive about what is happening, but with the view that we should use what we have so diligently and protect what is required, what we have in terms of the resources that we have, which is lost, especially in corruption tendencies.
All right. Let's hear from you, Mr. Nicholas Opio.
You know, I'm not an expert in economic affairs, and so I'm normally very guarded in speaking about the details of a budget. But as an ordinary Ugandan, I would ask, what is a budget anyway? Okay? Look at our budget performance. What is the budget if we cannot even stick to what we plan? Really, what is a budget? Okay? What is a budget? In less than 2 months from the beginning of the financial year, there will be supplementary budgets, there will be supplementary requests to buy cars for politicians, to special feedings at State House. And so, what is a budget? The budget will only mean a budget if we stick to what we plan. In the end, the loopholes being exploited were really well intended for exceptional unplanned circumstances. But it appears our budget is an unplanned circumstance as a whole, because before we even think about the first release, there already supplementary expenditure. And when you hear about supplementary expenditure, in many cases, it is not a request to spend. They've already spent it. They're asking for ratification. The loophole where it's supposed to be the exception has now become the rule, become the norm. And so to an ordinary Ugandan taxpayer, what is a budget in that regard? The second aspect of the question is this. Okay. Many Ugandans work so hard and pay so much taxes through their nose. If you are a salaried employee, nearly 45% of your income is taken by the state in direct taxes, not to mention indirect taxes. If you count indirect taxes and black tax, we are really paying Scandinavian tax rate. Okay? And yet, the ordinary Ugandan watches as politicians and elected officials sit and share their ad-and tax in luxurious expenditure. The words of Mr. Dialogue, Honorable Muktala, is very profound about what he calls unnecessary expenditures and the haphazard way in which we are doing what we call rationalization. Because I've made the case here before that if you are sweeping stairs, you don't sweep it from down up. You sweep that stair from up down. The biggest burden on the country's taxpayer is the heavy public expenditure. And Muktala is right, Honorable Muktala is right, that you cannot have the private sector, the government public sector having more money than private sector. It therefore means you're not creating jobs, you're creating a consumptive economy. And so, to an ordinary Ugandan, what is that budget? If the budget cannot translate into actual meaningful improvement into socio-economic welfare of this country. I took a drive in Karamoja not long ago cross Karamoja from Napak to Karenga. Moroto is a fantastic town, but outside of Moroto, you would think you're in a different country. You drive from Moroto to Kotido, to Karenga, into Kidepo, and into Kitgum. I think the president needs to put all his ministers, bus them to that place to see what they are doing. You don't think it is a part of this country. And yet, what we are seeing is taxpayers' money being wastefully expended. The third thing is this, Ken, and this is a litany of complaints, is that out of the 71 trillion budget, the target with the US government. Now we have seen the real impact of foreign investment in this country, particularly by the United States. These USAID reconfigurations is going to visit extreme economic hardship on the country. And Trump has even made that worse by imposing a 10% tariff on Uganda. And nobody's speaking about it. We're not even concerned. I've not heard these NRM gurus even express any concern about the tariff imposed on Uganda by the Trump administration. So we are going to have to learn very hard lessons. And I think this will expose the silver lining in this whole US debacle will expose the lies of our politicians and leaders in this country. And perhaps we'll refocus debate into meaningful austerity measures in ensuring we have an efficiently run budget, budgetary discipline, budgetary efficiency, and ensuring that budgets like this have corresponding meaningful impact on the lives of our people. The last one is this, and I've heard the Minister of Finance now belatedly suggesting a tax holiday for local investors, local startups. For a very long time, we have been turning over our budgets to foreign companies. When I see Museveni launching, when I see President Museveni launching a factory, he's walking in tow with a Chinese, with an Indian, with a Turkish person. I've never seen him launching a factory owned by Ugandan. And those guys enjoy vast tax holidays at the expense of local manufacturers and local investors. We are going to begin to ask tough questions about what the government will be doing in this budget for local investors, far beyond this alleged 30% or a 3-year rather tax holiday for local investors. Those questions have to be answered for that budget to make sense. When I was a young boy in primary school, our headmaster in a small school under grass thatched house, Mr. Griffin's Omona, God bless his soul, is now deceased, in a school called Unified Primary School. On the budget day, the headmaster would carry his box, Sony radio, and gather the P7 class to listen to the budget speech. It meant something. Now I don't think anybody will stop their breath to listen to Kasaija read the budget. We must make sure this budget means something. Right now I think it is pure baloney, pure empty speeches. The actual what really happens in real life is far different from what is being read in the budget. All right, Spectrum Extra, let's go for that break. When we return, we'll wrap up the discussion around this issue of the budget, but also taking the feedback from the listener, because I can see a number of comments coming in, including on this topic that we're discussing, and the one that we handled earlier, the one on the unending conflict in South Sudan. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. Let's continue after this. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra, live on Radio 1 FM 90, discussing the major events of the week. The panel, Honorable Stephen Talewirawa, Mr. Nicholas Opio, and Dr. James Tueheo. We can see a number of comments coming in, of course, from the previous discussion we had and the current one, so I'll read some of these comments. Subuga Shafiq writes and said, hello, thanks for the show. I think as a region, we are all responsible to protect our people in their respective countries, because the 1994 genocide in Rwanda taught us a good lesson. We shouldn't leave our people to suffer, yet we have the capacity to prevent such challenges like genocides on
On this, we should put aside our domestic issues. Good evening, Kenneth and Radio 1 and the panelists in studio. Arthur Katura from Rukunjiri. I would like to make a simple contribution in view of brokering peace in South Sudan. It's important we are mindful of the characters in the negotiation. President Museveni has a history of dishonesty with double-facedness. Whatever that means, I don't know. Good evening, Mr. Opio. It's unfortunate that the Sudanese wasted their 50 years fighting as one group after secession. They are killing, raping each other. Tribalism is evil. That's a comment from Carol. On the budget, plan for the coming financial year is outrageous, with a lot of budget lines paraded to fraudulently siphon taxpayers' money, e.g., 18 billion to be given to URA for medical drugs for their dispensaries, and yet Mulago, the National Referral Hospital, to get 17 billion shillings. Well, URA has explained that they are not actually part of that that particular arrangement. They seem to suggest that they have not asked for something like that. Swearing in the president in May 2026 will be allocated 6 billion shillings, which can build a regional referral hospital like Jinja, Rio Thagari. Benon Fred Winamas Korwaisira says most of the boards of authorities and MDAs are constituted with rewards, with rewardees who could not make it in politics than being passionate Ugandans who could think hard to make Uganda a better country, but rather have their appointment as a continued earning of a living. I wish everyone a good weekend. Honorable Mkitali, you heard from your colleagues the responses they gave. It seems
I think we are on the same
nobody
page.
believes in the budget process.
No, first of all, we are on the same page.
Actually,
that
I want to re-echo what Mr. Nicholas Opio said. Growing up in my village, I would go to a budget speech day was like
It meant something.
it meant something. It was like a celebration. They would even plant bananas. They would announce that maybe a liter of kerosene, taxes are reduced, and you would see people making noise. People would sit around their radio sets to listen to.
Now we tune to see.
Right now,
I'm
No.
starting from that one.
Now we
I
tune
don't
to
know.
see sleeping ministers.
I don't know.
And I was the son of the headmaster switching on the radio.
Hey.
So why it was so important, those budgets at that time would say from midnight to night,
Mm,
the price of sugar is going to be
exactly.
this. Price of salt is
Mm.
going to be this. That's why it was so important.
Paraffin.
So now what has changed?
It is because at that time we had scarcity of goods
Mm.
and government was trying to determine prices. Now we are in a different dispensation. The market forces, first of all, there's price stability and the goods and services are available. I was telling one of our grandees yesterday
Mm.
when I was driving between, they're working between Sheraton and Imperial Hotel. And I said, Uganda is very funny. In 1986, when NRA took over, they would bring sodas and beers in the garden there.
Mm.
So you would come and buy crates because there was scarcity. So you come and buy at a foods and beverage price or Uganda breweries price, and by evening everybody has taken them. So we have gone, the times are very different, and you no longer have to wait for the budget speech to know the price of fuel. Things have since changed. So that's one of the reasons. Because government by then was a provider of almost every good and services. Things are very different. But I wanted to agree first of all that we spend a lot of time talking about where we want to expend.
Mm.
The budget is supposed to be balanced, whereby revenues should inform the expenditure. And all the years in Parliament, I always wanted to hear more about the tax policy, how domestic revenue mobilization. But we are so quick to talk about how we're going to expend. No wonder we end up more borrowing than looking for homemade solutions about making money. So ideally, I would think as citizens, let's spend more time talking about the resource envelope.
Mm.
How do we get it? And if we are mindful about that, I think some of the wastage is because we think the development budget can be financed by external sources, and that's why we end up borrowing. And really, we don't have to make an argument here. What we call the debt burden, what we call the challenge is that what would have gone into human resource development, we are talking about the skilling, the health facilities, value addition on this project, the money ends up going for debt servicing.
Mm.
And debt servicing, including domestic borrowing, which really crowds out the private sector. So some of these things we have to face them realistically, without any partisan lenses, and agree where one take the country. When Trump says 10% on Uganda, whatever chance you had in AGOA means it's already reduced. And it's true. I want to thank the Minister of Finance for announcing that we want to be intentional. Investments should not be seen to be foreign. This campaign has started much earlier. If now you go to Kololo, no Kololo, as you go to Lugogo, at the one-stop center hub, Ugandans are seriously registering their companies as investors, and that's where you can get those incentives, exemptions, and tax holidays related to that. And it's also not true that anywhere in the world that investors have come to a country because of exemptions. Those who normally want to target that, there are those who want to do some cuts, those who are not genuine. A real investor would be more interested in bigger issues of the country, the stability of the country, the rule of law. Because somebody would want to know if tomorrow he invests in a country, will he be paid? If somebody defaults, what can he do? So those are more important than even exemptions. We have also, yes, SEC member Tuhe has talked about the oil flow. Yes, the oil is recoverable. For me, I'm not so excited about the much as I said that the ECOP makes us a hub in the region. We can bring oil from South Sudan and our brothers in DRC, but that also is a repayment. It's a purpose vehicle for recoverable costs. So we are paying our joint ventures who have given us the technology and the money, Total and Sinuk, through that. What should be exciting, and you've just said, should be the refinery. The refinery deal was signed just this week. As we left here talking about Umeme, switch off. People are complaining. Some of them update they cannot load Yaka. That Umeme has gone with Yaka. I thought that technology was purchased by government of Uganda. Nobody's talking about the refinery, because the refinery 3 years from now, which is going to inform the cost of your paraffin, of your petrol, of diesel, of gasoline, and most importantly, the byproducts that come out of that refinery. The rare, you can make fertilizer in Uganda, you can get bitumen for tarmac, you can get synthetics, the petrochemicals. They are so much needed in all these computer parts, all these things you're seeing here. They have some component of those petrochemicals. So I would have expected people to be more interested in discussing the refinery deal. Is there a local component? When I left here, I've been watching a lot of the Dangote story and how they are trying to fix the Nigerian crisis, which they have suffered for so many years as an oil-producing country, but exporting. So one would want to ask, we had a very good debate about the guy importing the fuel to Uganda, the one who is now, the company is called what? So one would want to know, how did you link the importer from Mombasa to Uganda, and now this one who is now going to produce oil inland, the hinterland refinery, the first of its kind? That debate I'm not hearing it anywhere, and that would really help us understand where we want to go as a country.
All right.
The other issue which is we should talk about, just last week we were all here lamenting about the unplanned cities, how we all flooded when it rained in Kampala. We would want, now National Planning Authority is also in charge of the National Fiscal Development Plan. In 2010 we made the law making the whole country planning area. Unfortunately we moved very slow in as far as approving the National Fiscal Development Plan. In 2022 Cabinet did approve that. I think it is time. And when the board was put in place in 2020, I don't think it was facilitated enough, and to work with local governments and lands to make sure this very important work was done. And also it was somehow constrained by the RAPEX. So there have been an inertia in as far as that's concerned. So want this time round to agree everything is being done to make sure that between the host, the local government, the the Minister of Lands, which is in charge, and the National Planning Authority, which has an overarching role to do comprehensive, integrated, not only socio-economic, but including the spatial and the national physical development. So it's important that if we do this, this would inform the future development. Where are you going to have the new frontiers? So that we stop this business of an investor coming and going in a wetland, and it comes with cost. We want an industrial area to be serviced. It has roads, it has electricity, it has water, it has ICT, and it should be in every region of the country because these jobs are required everywhere in the country. The census has informed us the challenge of a young population. Over 33% of the population is below 30 years. Most of them school going. So we really need to find the money. We have to be intentional if we are going to achieve the demographic dividend, because what you may see as a population burdened by the structure can actually be converted into an opportunity if we targeted these school-going young people and make sure that they get the necessary skills and they give us the human resource to feed into the industrial revolution, to make sure that even the fear we are talking about, if everybody in PDM produced, what will you do with the VAP harvest? That's a very good debate. At NPA, we are already having that. We're even talking to Minister of Science and Technology, James and his team. It is important. I think what I can see is that we are going to still work also with progressive farmers. There are progressive farmers out there who on their own are producing some good quantities. They need to be assisted in those technologies. They need to work with others to consolidate goods. It seems there were a lot of money in earlier budget spent into a semblance of stores, silos, and warehouse receipt, but either they were politically cited and they are not owned by the real progressive farmers. So what we need to do is an equivalent of the producer, specialized value chain producer cooperatives. That semblance, you can hear now the talk of creating a cooperative bank. You heard the Minister of Trade the other day talking about it. I think it is very important because it's also true. We've spent a lot of money in all these other efforts of deepening financial inclusion, which is enough money to capitalize a cooperative bank and an equivalent of a commercial bank.
All right, we have more comments coming in. Okelo Patrick Bonyo, specifically on the budget. Our budget is always inflated and not realistic to match the level of our economy. If we can collect 30 trillion, then you hiked the budget to 70 trillion. Where is the 40 trillion coming from? In most cases, we don't think of the source of income. What are we selling out to earn as dollars to fund the budget? Most of the budget we have is come, and less for production. These bad behaviors even trickles down to family level. A person put a wedding budget for far beyond his capacity and start expecting others to contribute to fund unnecessary expenditure. The problem is we want to do all projects at the same time, and that strains the resources. Dr. James Tweheyo, how do we better our budgeting process? One of the things I've heard economists and budget experts actually talking about, we rush into the next budget without even trying to find out whether the last one performed. How can we actually ensure that this thing works for us? Because budgeting is a very critical aspect of the economy.
Our budgets are related to the development plan, but also our manifestos are linked to the budget. Interestingly, when you look at the manifesto of the party now, it has already performed 51%, full completion of the pledges, of the promises, and another 34% is ongoing projects, leaving about maybe 12 or something percent. What does that tell you? That yes, much as part of the money is coming from borrowing, but at least for once, it's being put to use. There is one important aspect you must look at. What is this that we invest money in that we don't monitor, that we don't talk about? For example, somebody was talking about the money that is spent and that the hospital would need this much. I would put the attention some of these people. Maybe if you can even go and look at vote 116, where money is spent on drugs. The question is, who is monitoring this? That is one of the greatest challenges we have in here. Even when we do the monitoring, when discoveries are made, action is either not taken, or if taken, is taken late, and there is no preventive way of stopping the unnecessary expenditure or losses. The moment we still have money that go through and run unused, or run to personal pockets, or run to other unnecessary uses, the problem will still remain. Whether the budget is small or big, we need to protect it and ensure that the little money that is there is put to that use. When somebody was talking about the excitement of a budget, my brother Muktale explained it. We must admit, as human beings and as a country, that things change. We should remember what they always say. Actually, the young wouldn't like to hear the stories of 86, where people are going for soda, for beer, for salt. No. Those ones are gone. They're history. We must now look at a new era. We must admit that even by the when we entered in this studio, and by the time we leave out, we shall be 2 hours older. So things must change. We shall have changed in matter. We shall have changed in size. Everything would have changed. So we must admit that things are changing. And the fact that now we are reaching a level where people are looking at the budget and listening to the budget and knowing that the budget, yes, let it come. It may not affect the changes in prices. It will not affect my salt. It will not affect my oil, my fuel. It will not affect my food. The foods are changing in prices because of other circumstances, either environmental or anything else. I think we are way on the move and moving forward. The Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development is where I fault sometimes. When even before the budget is implemented, we go for a supplementary. Considering that even the law provided, by the way, that we can even use 3% before the approval. So I think we should be really very careful.
For unforeseen.
Yes, we should be a little bit careful
Now to the
and
budget
frugal.
that is unforeseen.
Yes, we should be really very
Supplementary is
frugal
the norm.
in the spending, particularly the funds of public. We have that duty. We must protect it. And if we don't, then at the end of the day, when people begin looking at what we are doing and doing it, not doing it right, then, and most importantly, if this budget is provide service, for goodness sake, we are people who are put in position by our own people we represent. If we don't provide them service, then we would be cheating them. And we must make sure that these services for which we budget are provided for. And this is the most important element. The issue of debt servicing, that one we are in it. We're already in the debt trap and we must service it anyway.
But what are we using the money that we are borrowing?
That is the whole question,
That's the
because
question.
I told you from the
Earlier
onset.
you talked about and said
Yes.
some money is actually redundant.
Absolutely, it is
And
redundant.
but we're not punishing.
For
those
5,
people.
for 10 years, money is redundant being borrowed. That is why I insisted that if anybody comes to Parliament
Who is in
requesting
charge?
for permission,
NRM.
it is no, not
Who is in
necessarily
charge?
NRM. It's Parliament only for
Who is
NRM.
sleeping on the job?
All of us
Parliament
are,
does not implement.
are having our own issues.
Parliament passes the budget,
But
gives
when
you money
Parliament
to
goes to
implement.
pass this budget and to approve the loans, do they scrutinize what these loans are going to do?
Who dominates Parliament?
Whether it is
When they
NRM or
wanted to
whoever.
stone the woman, they said, whoever has not done
Yes.
it, you cast the
So
first
all
stone.
of us are in it together.
Why do you want to?
Are you
All
comparing
of
this
us
guy
are in
with
it
Jesus
together.
now?
No, we must be realistic. All of us are in it together.
Eh.
Whether opposition, you are there to represent the people. Whether our own people, we are there to represent. And we must do the frugal work to ensure that we first of all follow up issues and we then get things done. Even then, by the way, beyond those who are in the Parliament, if you go to a health center, the health center may not necessarily be in an area dominated by NRM or whoever. When sickness comes, it will not select to know that you are NRM, you are movement, you are what. No, it will not.
No.
When a road is
Betty
supposed to be
Kamya
done,
told us that when she's sick,
For us, can even if not
Museveni will
Nairobi.
fly her way.
whether she
You,
flies or not.
you in your kawish.
No. Actually,
Then I'm kidding.
realistically, when a road
Boda.
is supposed to be made and it is not fully done, whether you are driving in a 4-wheel, whatever, at the end of the day, the repair cost will come. Whether it comes to me as a taxpayer, but still it will be there. And we must be careful, either what we say, or what we do, or even how we use the money that is entrusted to us as a government.
All right, we have a comment. Good evening, panelists. Thanks for the the wisdom. I will narrow my discussion on tea industry in Toro. Collapsed, losing $350 million annually, and Kenya earning $1.3 billion what went wrong with Uganda. Minister of Agriculture, Honorable Tumwebaze, told the president that the tea factory is not making money for the economy. What of Kenya and Rwanda? That's John listening in from Fort Portal. We have another comment. The difference between opposition and the government budget is the 30%, which also is the amount of debt servicing being over and above the government budget. Thus, debt management, how it fuels corruption, needs to be a focus area. 2, please comment on new deputy governor's theory of circulating GDP in his book, Transformative Economics, and how the issues of environment, social, and governance, ESG, are factored in the budget for sustainability. How is ESG embedded in National Development Plan number 4? Honorable Mkitali.
Now, first of all, I want to take, we should take a generational blame as a political class. And political class means both, and the elite, it means both the experts, whom you call the bureaucracy, and the political. And the political is elected both in the government and in the opposition. That even when we say there is high cost of public admin, it is ourselves, the political class. It is very important that if we are going to say, let us channel the money where it is needed most, where it will create jobs, we should know the money we are spending is paid by taxpayers. And the taxpayers, by the way, I was a tax agent for 15 years. Is not these companies, they are declared as the biggest taxpayers. Those are collectors from you, the consumers. Indeed. So if we understood that, we should know that jobs are government, the budget is a plan. But government doesn't create jobs. We can only do 500,000 police, army, civil servant, board members like me. It is the private sector, which is, and the other informal sector, which is going to create jobs. So the role of government is to be an enabler. How does the budget of the country, as a 1-year plan, or a 5-year plan, to inform the vision 2040? How do we create an environment for power to be affordable? The fuel I'm talking about, the refinery is coming, yes, but we're only debating at what cost will it give us the fuel. The other day, when we were interrogating the Umeme contract, couldn't understand us. It's at the exit part discussing Umeme. When Ujagali was coming in very expensively, people didn't discuss the cost. We ended up with the most expensive. So I would like to encourage the political class to really get interested, because even these loans you say are secured before they are ready. There are experts there, bureaucrats who go to these bank boards and approve these loans when they know even the land acquisition has not been done, but they have already procured the loan and it remains undisbursed and it attracts charges. So it's really we need to style up. So I think the message is to the political class. The other peasants, the voters are innocent. A lot of these informal people are suffering. They would want government to create a situation whereby they are assisted. And that's why for me I would support removing most of these taxes on the small beginners. You allow them to grow and then you tax them. Taxes should not and the debate of a good tax policy, I'm happy in the last budget report. The tax policy, the debate I left on the floor, I'm happy it is increasingly coming. We should talk about the tax policy. The tax policy can inform an industrial policy, because we don't just collect taxes to create revenue to spend. You can actually, what Trump is doing, he's trying to punish others who are trying to supply America, to create jobs for himself. But that protectionism also comes with a problem. Right. That's why people in the economics class, they will ask, is a tariff a tax? Others say no, but it is a tax, because at the end of the day, there is some consumer who pays. Honorable
Lumala Dombo, the spokesperson of the NRM party, who was also a member of parliament and chairperson of the Natural Resources Committee of Parliament, weighs in into this discussion, and he says the legal framework for that governed the preparation, reading, and discussion and passing of the national budget changed. In the past, even MPs would hear of the national budget the day it was read. Now the budget is read after it has been passed, and the stakeholder engagement is more prior to the passing of the national budget. Well, gentlemen, we are running out of time. I'll give you an opportunity to make your closing remarks. I'll begin with you, Mr. Nicholas Opio.
No, I mean, I spent my whole day today trying to get my good friend Aaron Kiza out. I can just proudly say he got his bail. So it's been a good end of the week. I wish all the listeners a wonderful weekend and a blessed Sunday.
Very quickly.
And to those taking part in the Kabaka birthday run, happy birthday to the Kabaka and to the people of Uganda. Sabasaja Awangale.
Mr. James, to have a
yes, I
few
welcome
seconds.
Aaron too, but that one also counts to the judiciary and the judicial system in this country, which some people criticize, but I think it is one of the issues that we should always look at positively. And then we should always still put ourselves to question, to task, how can we help South Sudan? Who are the most affected, by the way, in the South Sudan? And what will happen if this war in South Sudan continues?
All right.
We must remind ourselves that we are
We
part
should
and parcel
never
of this country.
allow ourselves to
And
go the
we are
Sudan ways.
All right.
That's why I'm an advocate of national dialogue. Prevention is better than
I'm
cure.
afraid we have to bring this discussion to an end. Thank you very much, dear panelists, for making time to be here. And thank you very much, dear listeners, for tuning in and contributing to this discussion. I've been your
I
host,
can confirm we can't
Kenneth
go
Anderson
Sudan away.
Lukwago.
At least
Do
the
have a
head of
fabulous
state will not
weekend.
be in public.
I like that.